Welcome to another reaction video. This one, I'm going to be responding to Joe Rogan speaking with Richard Dawkins, in which they suspend their understanding of morality from the great celestial skyhook that's bolted to nothing.
One of the things that you brought up in the God Delusion was the willingness of people to vote for a gay candidate for president, a black candidate for president, a woman candidate for president, but then an atheist, which is, I believe, 40%.
They think that you've got to have a belief in some kind of higher power in order to be moral. But the weird thing is that it doesn't have to be the same higher.
Now, if you're running for office, if you want to be president, you have to have a belief in some kind of higher power so that you don't start thinking of yourself as that higher power. If there is no God above the state, then the state is God. If there is no God above the president, then the president is God. And if you think about the current resident of the White House, that is terrifying.
It doesn't have to be the same higher power as the one you believe in. Anyone will do,
right,
as long as there is one. But if you don't believe in a higher power, you must be immoral. I
want to head this off right now. The claim by Christians is not that if you're an atheist, you must be immoral, like you rob banks every weekend, or that you are that you live like an anarchist. The issue is not that we are not claiming that atheists must be immoral, bad citizens. We are simply claiming that they cannot give an account of their so-called moral behavior. They can't give us a reason for it.
Is totally ridiculous when you think about the horrible immorality of, for example, both the Bible and the Quran, which are horrific in the sense that if you actually got your morals, if you got your moral values from the Old Testament or the Quran, and they share them a great deal, of course, you would be stoning adulterers to death.
Well, first, he says the Bible and the Quran are immoral. Immoral according to whom? By what standard? You're judging the Quran and the Bible as immoral because they don't conform to early 21st century standards?
Stoning people to death for breaking the Sabbath,
or chopping people up into pieces because they're inhabiting a mother's womb in an inconvenient way,
doing sacrifices, human sacrifices and animal sacrifices, all sorts of horrible things.
So we can sacrifice humans, as we still do today. You just must not call it a sacrifice.
Which, of course, do go on now, in Islamic countries especially. Gay people getting thrown off high buildings and women being beheaded for the crime of being seen with a man, not their husband, and that kind of thing.
And who is the most likely group in North America to be cozying up to these people doing these horrific things overseas? Why, it's the people who don't believe in God.
So that we can see what you get when you get your morality from an Abrahamic scripture. And yet there are still people in this country who say you cannot be moral unless you believe in a higher power.
No, not that you cannot be moral. You cannot give an account of your morality. Now, I think we're going to, let's see how he does.
What do you think? Let's extract this concept of a higher power. Let's get rid of it. Let's get rid of where do you think people get their morals and their ethics from?
Now, that's a profoundly difficult question. We clearly don't get them.
A minute ago, he was talking like it was really easy.
From religion, and yet we get them from somewhere, and you can
Oh, I'm glad we get them from somewhere.
That by the fact that the moral values of any particular century are markedly different from those of other centuries, even decades. So,
no kidding. And that means next century might be markedly different from this century. Maybe we'll go back to human sacrifice. Dawkins will be dead by then.
Even decades. So in the 21st century, we here now have moral values which are really significantly different from 100 years ago or 200 years ago, or 300 years ago.
I don't want to hear that they're different. I want to hear why they're right or wrong, or doesn't not matter.
And within any one of those centuries, you could take people who are in the vanguard of moral progress.
Progress, should have said progress. Progress by what standard? We're in the fog, driving down a road. We don't know where we're going, but we're making good time.
For example, in the 19th century, Abraham Lincoln, Charles Darwin, T.H. Huxley would have been on the liberal, progressive end of the spectrum, and other people would have been on the opposite end.
And why is that good? I ask.
But even Abraham Lincoln, for example, made a speech that I quoted in Outgrowing God, in which he said, of course, nobody would seriously think that black people are the equal of white people. Nobody would seriously say that black people should be allowed to vote or should be allowed to marry white people. This is Abraham Lincoln, who freed the slaves,
Right.
and was, as I say, in the forefront of progressive thought. Charles Darwin, again, was in favor of freeing the slaves. He was passionately anti-slavery. But he, too, thought that there was no question about black people being the equal of white people. They obviously weren't. And
So this would be a wonderful time for Dawkins to go on to explain how Charles Darwin was inconsistent with the fundamental premise of human evolution. If you've got people evolving up from primates, and if you assume a standard at all, which is another problem, then why can't one branch of humanity get ahead of another branch of humanity? Of course, creationists, those rubes and cornpones who believe that God created us, placed our first parents in the Garden of Eden, and that all of us are cousins descended from that first man and first woman, we have no problem accepting the basic equality of dignity of all human beings. But for evolutionists, Darwin was far more consistent than Dawkins is being.
Thomas Huxley, again, Darwin's bulldog, thought the same way. Now, those people were at the forefront, as I say. Today, they would still be in the forefront, and they would be horrified to look back on what they said in the 19th century.
Why does he think that they would still be in the forefront? Well, because they are icons, because they are deities for him. And of course, they've got to be on this cutting, bleeding edge, marching into the future, we know not where.
Well, something is changing as the centuries go by.
Sure. By what standard is it changing? If there is no God, if there is no transcendent reality, then all it is flux. It is not progress. There's no such thing as progress. If you don't have orientation, there's no such thing as up and down. If you are inhabiting the endless, infinite void, there is no front and back. There is no left and right. There is no up and down.
In Outgrowing God, I call it something in the air, which of course doesn't explain anything. But what I mean by
exactly
that is that it's not literally hovering in the air, but it's a collection of conversations between people, dinner party conversations.
And there's your foundation for morality. Dinner party conversations, wine and cheese events in Manhattan, or maybe upscale London, where certain bits of protoplasm say to other bits of protoplasm, isn't this brie wonderful? Let us emanate a collective morality out of our chatter.
Parliamentary decisions, congressional debates, judicial decisions by judges, juries.
Bits of protoplasm with black robes ascend up behind the bench and say things. And other bits of protoplasm get lots of other protoplasm to vote for them, and they go to Parliament, they go to Congress, and they say things. And then they go to wine and cheese events and become the gestation pool for morality.
Stories, newspaper articles.
Newspaper articles, don't forget opinion columnists.
All these things together conspire together to produce something in the air, something that defines a given century or maybe even a given decade.
Swamp gas fills the air. What he's talking about is an epistemological global warming. Too much carbon.
With the moral values of that decade.
The moral values of that decade floating in that decade, and then breezes come in from the next decade and blow it all away, and other bits of protoplasm have their wine and cheese events in which they emanate certain thoughts, big thoughts, cool thoughts, wonderful thoughts, thoughts stated to impress the cute girl across. And then it all goes into the collective, and then they produce morality. All rise.
Knowledge base, which is just so superior today in terms of like what the general public has access to.
Superior by what standard? By what standard? I would urge you, I don't believe in tattoos, but if I did, I would want people to tattoo by what standard on the inside of their eyelids.
In terms of what we understand about human beings, it's just different than it was back then. And it continues to be different. And now with the internet, we have...
It's just different. But is it better? And as soon as you say good, better, best, by what standard are you saying good, better, best? Better according to whom? Why?
Have so much more access to these conversations. And it's not just about being at a different...
Access to millions of inane conversations, access to millions of rootless conversations doesn't get you anywhere.
Dinner table with the right people. You can watch YouTube videos
That's
of
right.
yourself debating religion.
YouTube videos teach you nothing except for this one.